You're listening to Health Professional Radio. My name is Wayne Buckler, and my guest today is Mark Borsody. Now, Mark is the Chief Medical Officer with Nervive. Mark, welcome to Health Professional Radio.
My pleasure, Wayne.
Now, Mark, tell us a little bit about Nervive. It's not a name that sort of tells me what the firm does, so introduce that for us.
Well, Nervive is a medical device company that we founded to advance the development and bring to market a medical device that's an emergency treatment for stroke. The device is called the VitalFlow stimulator. The company is based in Akron, Ohio, and it is at the juncture of taking the VitalFlow into clinical testing with a key research partner at the Metropolitan University in Mexico City.
Now, Mark, we should say up front that you're not a stranger to this. You're a neurologist and the inventor of the VitalFlow stimulator, and I understand you've got over 20 years' experience in preclinical and clinical neuroscience, as well as 6 years' executive experience in stroke pharmaceutical R&D.
That's correct, Wayne. I actually began my interest in neuroscience as a neurophysiology basic science researcher, and subsequently went into medicine to pursue uses for various manipulations of neurophysiology as treatments of disease. So in that sense, the VitalFlow is the culmination of a research interest beginning in very basic science.
Now, most of our audience are clinicians of one sort or other working in mostly in acute care, doctors, nurses, and allied health professionals. And I describe myself as being a lapsed nurse. So once upon a time, in the distant past, I did some nursing. But I was intrigued to read about the VitalFlow. On your website, it says it's a non-invasive platform technology that can treat conditions of brain ischemia, and it does it with pulsed magnetic stimulation of the facial nerves. Have I got that right?
That's correct. The technology that underlies the VitalFlow is, in fact, very well-established technology dating back many decades. It's well known in physics that a rapidly changing magnetic field can induce electrical currents in a conductor, whether that be a wire or a neuron. Principle is fundamentally the same. Similarly, I would say, to the physiology behind using the facial nerve to dilate the brain arteries is very well established. And that is something that has been demonstrated since, I would say, at least 1930 in numerous animal studies. And to that end, we capitalize on very well-established physiology and very well-established technology and combine these two to make a very simple, straightforward medical device.
Now, Mark, given that the technologies are well established, as you say, this hasn't been put together by anyone else, has it?
Not to our knowledge. We certainly have been looking for such efforts. We've spoken to countless people who are both authorities on the science and the technology and even the business end of such efforts, and no one has ever pointed out to us an effort along these lines.
And so the next step now for you, I think you mentioned earlier, is clinical trials?
That's correct. We are at the moment proving the safety and tolerability of the VitalFlow prototype in normal subjects, and we'll be conducting a pilot study in patients with a stroke-like condition called cerebral artery vasospasm that will provide that proof of concept in humans to show that the VitalFlow would make a useful emergency therapeutic device in the treatment of ischemic stroke.
You're listening to Health Professional Radio with Wayne Buckler. I'm in conversation with Mark Borsody, who's telling an intriguing story of a device that they're currently bringing to market through their company Nervive, and this is a device to provide emergency treatment for stroke and stroke-like symptoms. Now, Mark, how big a study do you think this will be?
Well, the pilot study that we intend to conduct is, of course, quite small. It's less than a dozen patients, And the purpose is, of course, always to confirm as much as you can the safety and tolerability of the device, but also to demonstrate the ability of the device to adjust biomarkers of stroke, such as the loss of cerebral blood flow, that would be meaningful and impactful on clinical outcomes. And so these pilot studies, the particular one we're planning to do, is really focused on such measures of brain perfusion and brain ischemic tissue injury.
And do you have any sense when you'll have that work completed?
Well, that work should be completed by the end of the calendar year. And after that point in time, we will be able to begin conducting larger and larger clinical studies to prove the benefit of such a treatment on the clinical outcome of patients with stroke. And those studies, of course, become larger and more complicated. At the end, they will involve a comparative analysis of active stimulation versus sham control stimulation, and will involve the accepted clinical outcome measures of efficacy that have underlay stroke treatment for quite some time.
Now, Mark, the device is called the VitalFlow. Paint me a word picture. What does this look like?
The analogy that we often use, Wayne, is the cardiac defibrillator. We envision the VitalFlow to, in many ways, look and serve as does a cardiac defibrillator for potentially fatal arrhythmias. So the VitalFlow that we envision is, in its first form, a cart-based device that can be used in the emergency department setting, and that can be brought to treat a stroke patient in an emergency department bay from some local storage. The second version of the device that we envision is smaller and more portable, somewhat along the lines of a suitcase, and can be placed into the ambulances that will initially receive and potentially even treat stroke patients. And so by doing so, that we can carry out to the stroke patient the initial treatment for their condition.
Now, it occurs to me, Mark, that someone who was having some sort of cerebral bleed might in fact be hurt by stimulating in the way that the VitalFlow hopes to do. Is that a consideration?
It's a huge consideration for us, Wayne. The issue of having stroke in the field not being clearly identified as a stroke caused by a blood clot occluding an artery of the brain versus a ruptured artery is potentially very problematic for that pre-hospital treatment. The issue that we have then is to identify stroke patients in that pre-hospital setting as ischemic stroke patients prior to applying the VitalFlow to those patients. We expect in the near future that there will be diagnostic testing modalities available in the ambulance setting. In fact, we see many of those already in development. And so we expect fully by the time that the VitalFlow is ready for miniaturization and placement in the ambulance, that there will be available such technologies for identifying ischemic stroke patients there. We've also made the discovery, quite serendipitously, that stimulation with the VitalFlow in the context of brain hemorrhage through a ruptured cerebral artery does not appear to worsen that condition. This is something that we've shown in unpublished animal studies, and something that, of course, would need very extensive evaluation and confirmation in patients, in humans with hemorrhagic stroke. But it does offer this opportunity to potentially apply the VitalFlow without the need for diagnostic evaluation in a stroke patient. This is, I should mention, nothing that our device does per se. It is, in fact, from what we can tell, the property of the facial nerve that we stimulate with the VitalFlow that appears to be self-regulating and self-limiting.
That's an intriguing finding, Mark.
It's a finding, and it's a very essentially useful finding, again.
Yeah.
a great deal of confirmation in the context of an undifferentiated stroke patient. But it is a potential opportunity that would allow us to take technology like the VitalFlow into the ambulance setting and treat stroke patients prior to diagnostic confirmation of ischemic or hemorrhagic subtypes. That would, of course, greatly reduce the treatment times and improve the quality of the outcomes in the ischemic stroke subgroup.
It certainly does sound like it's on the verge of one of those magic therapies in medicine, which we see every 20 or 30 years when something suddenly changes, a bit like the vaccines that came out a few years ago for cervical cancer that just kind of changes the whole world in medicine. It has that kind of flavour to it.
We believe obviously positive things along those lines. We certainly hope for them. And of course we are testing for the opposite. We're testing to see where it is weak, not where it is strong.
Mark, it's always a pleasure to talk to people who are passionate about their subject and knowledgeable, and I certainly thank you for sharing your time with me this morning. My final question is about misconceptions. In every piece of work, there are misconceptions that drive people nuts and keep them awake at night. What's the biggest misconception in your field that fits that bill of keeping you awake at night?
That is the perception that stroke is a difficult area for medical therapeutic development. It has a terrible reputation, and that reputation, of course, scares away funders and investors and supporters who would rather spend their money and their efforts and their time on things that they feel will be more successful. When you look at the numbers of products that have come to market for stroke versus the number of products that have been attempted to be developed for stroke, the odds are actually really quite good. The numbers are about 1 in 1,000 products. If you look at the industry average for other areas of medicine, in terms of the pharmaceutical productivity, it's about 1 in 5,000 to 1 in 8,000.
Yes.
The stroke is actually a very easy area to develop products for. More of this perception that, in fact, keeps that denominator terribly low, that leads to the very striking paucity of treatments that we have for this medical condition, which at the end of the day is really just a plumbing problem of the brain.
Mark, only a neurologist and a neuroscientist could explain it as a plumbing problem, I'm sure. My brother, who is a plumber, will be very pleased to hear that he's got a leg into the field of medicine.
It's a pleasure to link to such people. They know how to come out and fix problems very quickly. It's a sad fact, but I think that's a very good analogy. Anyone who thinks that stroke is a complex physiological problem need only look at some of the other medical conditions in neurology for comparison. I think they'll find very quickly that it's about as simple a problem as you could hope to have.
Well, Mark, I hope that in our conversation today we've managed to help with that misconception and convince a few more people that this is a relatively simple area and worthy of investment and funding to bring a device to market that has such promise to it. Thank you for your time today. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
It's been my pleasure, Wayne. Thank you very much.
And we certainly look forward to hearing from you as the results of your research come to light. If you've just missed my conversation with Mark Borsody, Mark is a neurologist and inventor of the VitalFlow stimulator, and it's been an intriguing chat about some emerging technology to treat ischemic episodes. You can find a transcript of this interview on our website at www.hpr.fm. There's also a SoundCloud archive and a YouTube archive. So if you've missed our chat, do head off to YouTube or to the transcript to have a listen. This is Wayne Buckler for Health Professional Radio.